Namaste, hi, I'm Kathy from Tri-Balance Yoga, and I'm going to share with you here my SI joint healing journey. Perhaps your yoga practice has become a Raja or royal pain in the butt lately. If you've been suffering with this injury, I think you know what I mean. When you've been practicing for a while, sometime in the first couple of years of your yoga journey, for many, something may seemingly out of the blue come up and bite you on the butt. For me, it was late 2017 on a 300-hour yoga teacher training with my mentor and teacher Noah Maze, and I was on my jade yoga mat. Sounds of ujaii breathing were permeating the atmosphere in the room, but I was becoming increasingly distracted by a sensation in my left buttock, a sharp grabbing sensation as I transitioned from triangle pose to half moon pose. And as the practice progressed, my discomfort increased. But I desperately tried to conceal my discomfort and pain from my teacher. This was probably my unchallenged people pleaser part coming out, and I didn't want to make my mentor, who I looked up to, know that I was struggling. I know it's yoga, right? So silly. But I'm human and flawed, and these tendencies show up on the mat for me too. So anyway, this was the onset of my SI joint dysfunction. I say onset because it was when the pain started, but really it had likely been building for some time. Fast forward to this scene, and I'm deep into my yoga journey, both as practitioner and teacher, and so committed to my practice and the yoga lifestyle. I had on some level become identified with my role as a yogi and yoga teacher, and now I had this injury. I felt, to be honest, slightly embarrassed and ashamed that I was also the physio yoga teacher and I should know better. I should have known how to avoid this type of thing happening, right? My ego was for sure getting in the way, and so I had this kind of crisis of confidence, and I had to now figure out how to heal this issue in myself. I didn't want to have to stop practicing yoga and give up my regular practice that had given me so much grounding and mental and emotional clarity. I also didn't want to have to stop progressing my asana practice and progressing my teaching. I wanted to be a yoga teacher and a yogi more than anything. And before this point, I'd felt really connected to my purpose. But I now felt like a failure. I felt out of control and powerless. That's when I really started to shift my intentions and was the beginning of a totally new way of practicing. I knew I had to be more sensible and try to build a sustainable yoga practice. A way of practicing that would allow me to keep practicing for my whole life and not have to stop when I reached a certain age or had an injury. Shortly after this, I signed up to yin training with Jo Fee, who you may know or have heard of. She's worked directly with Paul Grilly and Sarah Powers, the original founders of yin yoga. And wow, was this a real eye-opener, getting to dive into the anatomy and study the effects of skeletal variation. Not because it was the first time that I'd heard about skeletal variation. I was a physio of more than 10 years experience by this stage. But the fact that I knew about this, but was ignorant of it in my own practice and blindly ignored this fundamental truth in my own body. Partly because my intentions had been hijacked by ego and this relentless pursuit of self-improvement, but also because I had a limited view of what asana was really about. And if I'm really honest, on a subconscious level, I think I thought modifying my poses felt like failing or not practicing to my full potential, and that perhaps failure isn't quite the right word, but it felt like stagnation. This mindset, I think, was triggered partly because I had no other solid frame of reference for practicing asana other than find the deepest stretch and a particular aesthetic. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with trying to improve flexibility or work into the deepest physical expression of our poses. It's just when this is the only framework we have to guide us on the mat, it's really missing the essence of the practice and what makes yoga such an incredible practice for healing and wellness. The first reframe for practicing asana that I experienced, that I want to offer you here too, is the teaching within the Yoga Sutras of sthira and sukha. This idea or teaching that in each pose, we're seeking to balance two energies, the energy of effort with the energy of ease or surrender. And the ability of this intention or focal point in our practice to bring about autonomic nervous system regulation and emotional resilience. So if we're practicing meeting an intense physical challenge with a softness in our face, our jaw, our tongue, and down into our belly, all of these parts that we tend to grip when we're in stress, then there's a really powerful toning effect on the vagal response that regulates the autonomic nervous system. And if we're really truly practicing with this intention of sthira and sukha, then we're not likely to overdo or over effort in our poses and overload our SI joint. So what your physical edge is, that point in the pose where you strike the balance of effort and ease, that physical expression is going to be different in each person. Partly because of physical conditioning like strength and soft tissue tension or flexibility, and partly the capacity for regulation in your nervous system. But a big component of what your edge looks like, from the outside at least, is going to be dictated by your bony anatomy. So that what my physical expression of, say, Sukhasana, easy pose, looks like, and I'll come off my perch here so that you can really see this, my Sukhasana may look different to what yours looks like, which is likely different to what BKS Iyengar's looks like in these images from Light on Yoga. And these images from Paul Grilly's site really show this fundamental truth, that we are not all created equally on an anatomical level. We are so different. No two yoga poses look exactly the same because no two skeletons are the same. The image box on the left shows two different hip sockets or acetabulums. The image furthest to the left has a deep hip socket that's facing a little bit more forwards towards the front, which is called anteverted, while the image on the right has much shallower hip sockets, which face more towards the back, called retroverted. This one single anatomical variation has significant implications for how much range of motion Yogi A can achieve in poses involving external rotation in the hips, like Sukhasana. Yogi B would probably look more like Iyengar with their knees touching the floor, while Yogi A's would be sitting up higher off the floor. And if Yogi A were to attempt to try to make their pose look like Yogi B, then they would end up cranking their hips into more external rotation and likely transferring excess force into the SI joint to try to get those last few degrees of movement that they simply don't have. This doesn't in any way make Yogi A less of a yogi than Yogi B. We know this, right? We know this consciously, But on a subconscious level, I think when we see these poses glamorized on social media, it's easy for us to forget this sometimes and succumb to the influence of more range of motion is somehow better. The other images in the middle box and the far right show two other marked anatomical variations that are within the scope of normal anatomy. These images show significant differences in the angle of the neck of the femur, both of which will result in different maximum ranges of motion that can be achieved in the hips. And when the hips reach their maximum joint range of motion, if we attempt to push further, then what we end up doing is using our femur bones like levers to pry the pelvic bones further apart and attempt to get those last few degrees of movement. And this results in excess force being transmitted into the SI joints. And the second reframe I want to offer you in your asana practice, I think is spoken to beautifully in this quote from BKS Iyengar, that consciousness finds its level in the body through the practices of asanas and pranayamas. So he says that we awaken consciousness to spread in the body, that the extension of your arm or your leg in, say, Warrior Two pose is not the extension of your arm or leg. It's the extension of consciousness to reach that area. So it's about expansion and extension of consciousness in what we do on the mat, which then has the capacity for the same off the mat, so that we can live more consciously. He says the practical aspects of yoga brings consciousness to spread like water on the floor to find its level. So that as you reach your arm and stretch fully to your maximum edge, it's bringing that inner aliveness, the felt sense of energy moving right into your fingertips, to the peripheral parts of your body. And that this is like water seeking its level. And so consciousness finds its level in the body through the practices of asanas and pranayamas. When we look at BKS Iyengar's physical expression of poses, because he has a ton of range of motion, like many other bendy yogis out there, maybe you're one, it means that for him, in order to extend and expand consciousness within his body, he is seeking his final edge, which may involve moving through much greater range of motion than someone with different shaped bones. This is great news because it means that we really only ever need to be concerned with playing the hand we've been dealt, anatomically speaking, not someone else's hand. If my fullest expression of Warrior One looks like this, then through this lens, this is pushing consciousness to its greatest expansion in my body. But for Iyengar, he needs to go further to find his edge, to facilitate this expansion of consciousness. And both expressions have an equal potential for raising consciousness when practiced with the right intention and attention. They just look different from the outside, which really doesn't matter because it's an internal experience. And in fact, there's actually 3 ways the yogis talk about that we can work to deliberately harness and direct the flow of prana or life force energy in the body in order to raise or expand our consciousness. One is action, which correlates with asana or poses and working with our bandhas. And the second is with the breath, directing the flow of breath in order to direct the flow of energy. And the third is with awareness or meditation. And we end up using a combination of all 3 of these methods in our practice typically. But in this way, if we have an injury that limits finding our fullest expression of poses physically, we can choose to lean more into using our breath and our awareness to cultivate this expansion of consciousness instead. So I really wanted to offer you this broader perspective of asana to hopefully inspire you to practice modifications of poses. Modifications that support healing of your SI joint, but also that are 100% valid in the context of any intention you may have of raising consciousness and really experiencing yoga with a capital Y. Thank you for watching this video and listening to my story. I appreciate your precious attention and the opportunity to serve you in your healing journey, even if it's just in this one small way by sharing my story and hopefully inspiring you just to start looking into how to modify your poses to create a more sustainable practice that really allows you to keep practicing for your whole life. And I just want you to know that you're not alone, that this is such a common injury that shows up on the mat. The fact that you're still here at the end of this video, I think speaks volumes about your level of commitment to yoga and to your self-empowerment and healing. That you're someone who values taking full responsibility for your own healing and wellness and really going to the next level. If you're feeling inspired to start incorporating more pose modifications into your practice, I've included a link below in the description to my free pose modification guide. If you have any questions about your pose modifications or I can help out in any way, please comment below or reach out to me via Insta DMs at Kathy's Yoga Journal. From my heart to yours, namaste.